Good afternoon and welcome back. I'm Marcus Peter. The State of the Union address is today, and most Americans will watch it the way one watches a halftime show at the Super Bowl. We're aware that spectacle has replaced substance, and that's our problem. I was talking with my friend Brian Shanley earlier today, and I came up with this pithy line, which I'm not really known for, really, pithiness. Our politics is a circus, and the clowns are in charge. And before anyone explodes, I want to make clear here, this is about more than just Donald Trump. Like the man, hate the man, whatever. This has been happening to U.S. politics since the Obama administration. We saw a decided paradigm shift socially during the Obama administration. At that point, our politics moved from a contest of competency to then a parade of pageantry to now just a full-blown circus. We identify with identity politics. We've started electing the clowns, and we celebrate the pies in the face. We know that when we witness moments like, for example, Gavin Newsom, governor of California, attempting to relate to black voters by saying he struggled with standardized tests, that's more performative than anything. And the reason why he has to do it is because he believes that if he makes those remarks, then that identity correlation can substitute the fact that they don't share any civic virtue in common. That's the state that we find ourselves in. And so we as the audience are expected to cheer on cue and retweet those moments accordingly. There was a time, however, when presidential speeches didn't care about polling data because they touched the deeper undercurrents of civic virtue, of American memory. In 1986, President Ronald Reagan prepared to deliver his annual address when, on that day, that very day, the space shuttle Challenger exploded before the eyes of school children across the nation. Mind you, many people were watching it. I actually remember watching it in school years after it happened, of course, and it was a moment of global history. We all had to learn about it. What did Reagan do? Well, he postponed the State of the Union, and he addressed the country from the Oval Office. And he did it in a brief and carefully crafted speech. Why? Because the moment was a raw moment of history, and it needed him to be immediate, and it needed him as the president to touch on the shared virtue of the nation. So what did he do? He spoke to grieving families, to students who had watched their teacher board the shuttle, to NASA workers, to a stunned and shocked nation. He recommitted the country to exploration, and he invoked the courage of early adventurers. But then he closed with lines from John Gillespie Maggie's poem, High Flight. Slipped the surly bonds of earth and put out my hand and touched the face of God. Now that poem was written by a young pilot who died in training during the Second World War. And so the connotation for all those who knew the poem was the weight of sacrifice and aspiration. Reagan's speech did something rare in public life. It lifted our national gaze to the heavens. Peggy Noonan, Reagan's speechwriter, later recalled that great speeches remind a people who they really are. The Challenger event shocked the nation, but the Challenger address that Reagan delivered reminded the people that they belonged to a history woven together through literature, courage, grief even. And in that moment, politics was put at the service of the nation's moral imagination. You compare that with the present climate. You compare that with politics as we've known it, at least for over the past decade now. State of the Union addresses consume immense energy inside the White House, and communications just explode during those days, and then they evaporate days later. Bill Clinton famously declared in 1996 that the era of big government is over. That line is still quoted to this very day, but most other annual addresses blur into one another. It's a spectacle, but then the memory fades because we don't have the same staying power as we did, and the cynicism about institutions continues to deepen. Earlier generations, though, expected something different from their leaders. So yes, I go all the way back to Washington's farewell address. He warned against factionalism and foreign entanglements. And he had a real gravity about his words, too, because he assumed that we as a citizenry would remain morally serious. Of all the dispositions and habits which lead to political prosperity, religion and morality are indispensable supports. I love quoting that line, because it wasn't a political slogan. This was applied biblical theology. Washington understood self-government requires self-restraint. Self-restraint needs to be grounded in transcendent truth, God. Abraham Lincoln's second inaugural address, he called the nation to humility. This was amid the Civil War, mind you. He talked about how both sides read the same Bible and pray to the same God. He acknowledged that we had a shared moral framework, even as the blood of our compatriots was staining the fields. He did not indulge in triumphalism. He summoned the entire country to malice towards none, charity for all. He essentially was saying that reconciliation was a providential necessity for our history to move forward. And so he didn't flatter the crowd. He didn't egg on his faction. He chastened us to morality, to Christian accountability. I mean, those speeches rallied us around Christian and natural law ethos. Truth exists. Justice has an objective meaning. The American experiment depends upon virtue cultivated in families and churches and then societies. Alexis de Tocqueville, when he observed our young republic, he concluded that liberty in America was sustained by habits of the heart that were formed in religious communities. He saw that our political freedom, untethered from moral formation, would decay into chaos. Boy, did he not know how prophetic he was being. But even today, our moments of national unity are quickly subsumed into political narratives. The U.S. men's Olympic hockey team won gold for the first time in 46 years. On the anniversary of the Miracle on Ice. You might expect explosive celebration on the whole nation. Instead, what happened? Well, commentators rushed to assign political symbolism to that simple athletic triumph. Why? Because the men's team is going to the White House for the State of the Union address. The arena of sports itself used to function as a temporary truce in the culture wars, but now even sports are politicized. And that tells us something deeper than a political problem. It's a cultural exhaustion. We can't think outside of identity politics. And the State of the Union address risks becoming another episode in a serialized drama where politicians crave applause as their new currency, and then they fuel outrage on the other side for ratings. How does that maintain the dignity of the office? The obsession with these optics will corrode statesmanship. A leader that's concerned primarily with viral moments becomes a caricature. The temptation to play the clown arises because one side of the crowd rewards it, the other side of the crowd shares it in outrage. The clown cannot shepherd a nation through crisis, though. They can entertain, they can provoke, they can infuriate, they can distract, but they won't bind wounds. They won't articulate a common good, and they certainly won't bind us in a common shared moral law. And history, therefore, condemns us. Reagan referenced anniversaries in the Challenger address, but he was following a tradition. John Paul II he echoed a tradition by John Paul II, who believed that God sanctifies time and that anniversaries invite deeper reflection. George Weigel wrote that for John Paul, jubilees bring depth, dimension of history to the surface of Christian consciousness. In other words, serious leaders understand that history will repeat itself and we have to reverence history. And that's why you contrast that with the way present political speeches go, and it is startling. But don't despair, though. I know I've said all of this, but don't despair. Because our American tradition has within it the resources to be renewed to what we once were. That's where we came from, and we can get back there. Our Constitution presumes a people that's capable of deliberation, of moral appeal to the laws of nature and of nature's God. There's an objective moral order that's accessible through the American gene. It's in our bones. And if our leaders can speak within that framework, they can elevate the general public discourse. So tonight, as tonight's address unfolds, we might want to ask ourselves whether it will lift the national gaze or choreograph applause. And if it doesn't lift the national gaze to heaven, maybe we can start compelling future addresses and future leaders to remember that their moral clarity is needed for our moral imagination as a nation. And perhaps we'll start seeing State of the Unions that ground us in justice and point our eyes heavenward. Stay tuned. I'm Marcus Peter.